It's the middle of the 80s, and engineer and businessman Bill Lowy is composing himself for the meeting of a lifetime. He had been granted a meeting with the Corporate Management Committee, the all-powerful council who decided the direction of one of the biggest, most valuable and technologically advanced companies in the country and the world, IBM, International Business Machines. At the time, IBM was synonymous with computers, and their mainframes powered everything from big banks to the space program. But as Lowy faced the CMC, he's there to promise the one thing they don't have: a home computer.
There's rumors that Apple is about to go public. It's very obvious that home computers are here to stay, and thanks to spreadsheet software, more and more businesses are adopting them too. And yet, this is a space where IBM virtually has no presence on.
Mr. Low, you know as well as us, we tried the 5100 series, and yet that was a resounding failure. What do you propose that is any different?
Simple. For this type of product, our strict corporate culture is just not working. We cannot do this within the culture of IBM, so we need to acquire another company.
Well, if that's the case, why don't you take your own independent business unit to our labs in Florida and develop this computer outside of the culture of IBM?
Great! So the company I suggest we acquire is Atari. Wait, I'm sorry, what?
It is up to you to recruit the engineers you need and present us a prototype in a month. Prove to us that this is something you can build outside of IBM culture, and then we will authorize your plan for a personal computer.
Lowy returns to Florida with enough funding to recruit a small group of specialized engineers who got right into brainstorming how to pull the impossible project together. Even if they had a prototype ready in a month, the final product will have to be developed in just a year. In a traditional IBM project, complete control will be demanded on every element of the product, and careful testing of every component will be needed, which will require at least 2 years for a prototype to be put together. So, by sheer necessity, they had to do the complete opposite. Every principal component, from the CPU to the operating system, was being bought from external companies, and the whole device will use an open architecture that made component swapping and developing of peripherals easier. This was a radical departure of how IBM operated at the time, but they had no choice. If they were going to finish the product in time, software and hardware had to be developed independently from existing parts, something that would have been much more difficult on a closed architecture. As long as IBM controlled and patented the BIOS, the basic level of firmware that made everything work together, they could retain control of the whole ecosystem, even if every part was not made by them. And since it was copyrighted, no one could use that BIOS without their permission. No one could be that's stupid. And so the search began for every key component, starting with the CPU. If this was going to be a 16-bit machine, there were a variety of options for CPUs in the market from the likes of Texas Instruments, Motorola and others. In fact, Federico Faggin, the inventor of the microprocessor, which we interviewed and covered his story in a couple of previous videos, had split from Intel and created a processor company called Zilog, which had a promising 16-bit processor in the works. However, Zilog was owned by oil company Exxon, which was gearing up to compete with IBM in the mainframe and office space, so they could not use anything from them. But Intel was readily available with its 16-bit Intel 8086. However, according to Blue Magic by James Chposky and Ted Leonsis, written in 1988, which is the main source for a lot of the stories, the 8086 was a bit too new and a bit too powerful, to the point that there was some worry that the CMC would not approve it for fears of cannibalizing other high-end IBM products. So instead, they used the 8088, a chip that is essentially an 8086 with a reduced data bus, which made the rest of the computer design much cheaper. Besides, they could eventually expand and make a version with the 8086. With the processor pegged and a barely working, constantly malfunctioning prototype build, Lowy finally made its case for its crazy open architecture computer to the CMC, and against all odds, he got their approval. A business unit called Project Chess will be created with the mandate to rapidly expand the team and have the computer ready in time. His work was done, and eager to climb the corporate ladder, Lowy left for a promotion as a vice president of the Information System Division, leaving the team in the hands of one of his earliest recruits, an engineer called Philip Don Estridge. There was no time to lament the change in leadership because the computer now needed to acquire its next components, and this will set forth an absolutely insane chain of decisions. As Estridge and his team meet with a company called Digital Research in California for a meeting, the feeling of the room had turned sour. Digital Research owned the closest thing that existed to a standard operating system for business computers, Control Program for Microcomputers, CPM. And selling licenses for this operating system had made its creator, hacker Gary Kilwell, pretty wealthy and just a little bit difficult to work with. The IBM team had scheduled a meeting to discuss modifying and licensing CPM as the operating system for this new computer, but apparently Kildahl had just had a fight with his wife and had just blown the meeting to cool off by flying his private plane? Yeah, we have the president of the company present. Kildahl's wife and their obviously uncomfortable company lawyer refused to sign any of IBM's NDAs or even discuss what would be needed to modify CPM for 16-bit computers, so they left empty-handed. And so, they were off to their next meeting. For the computer to function, they needed an operating system and a programming language. Ideally, they needed a version of BASIC, a high-level programming language meant to simplify computer tasks. Now, Estrich and his team might have failed to secure an operating system, but on the same side of the country there was another company that had made a name of themselves making versions of BASIC: Microsoft. Microsoft had gotten its start by creating a version of BASIC for the Intel-based Altair, one of the very first microcomputers meant for hobbyists rather than companies. And from there, they had capitalized on this success to make a name of themselves as makers of versions of the BASIC programming language to everyone, from Commodore to Apple. We have explored a bit of the Commodore story on a past SideQuest, and yes, Microsoft was led by a shockingly young Bill Gates, who, unlike other recent computer millionaires, was a smart businessman who understood the severity of meeting with IBM and had cleared his calendar for it and signed the NDA as soon as it was presented to him. Over the exploratory meeting, the IBM team will be surprised of just how collaborative Gates was at the idea of working with IBM and just how much of a businessman he was compared to his other peers. But over the follow-up meetings, when they finally revealed to Microsoft that they wanted to license their BASIC for an IBM home computer, they will come to realize just how good of a nose for business opportunities Bill Gates had.
So this version of BASIC we're making, what operating system is it gonna run on top of?
We're still in the process of securing one.
Wait, you don't have one still? What if we could provide one? What if we could add an operating system to our proposal for your license?
We could certainly consider that.
Bill, we don't have an operating system. Where in the world are we gonna get one?
But Gates had a plan. He had heard of a friend with his tiny company not far from their offices called Seattle Computer Products that was developing an operating system called 86DOS that was similar to CPM but optimized for the Intel 16-bit 8086, hence the name. Hiding the fact that he had IBM on the line, Bill made him an offer $25,000 for a non-exclusive license so they could port it to the IBM prototype. And not long after, $50,000 for all rights. Less than $100,000 for an operating system he will license to IBM for millions. With a non-exclusive license. How did Bill Gates manage to get away with licensing this new operating system to IBM non-exclusively is an area of active discussion, but there are some good ideas as to what happened. One thing that I have failed to mention is that right around this time of our story, IBM was recovering from a very close encounter with the US government. In 1969, the Department of Justice sued IBM for attempting to monopolize the computer marketplace. The idea was for IBM to be broken into smaller companies. By the time of our story, IBM had nearly won the lawsuit, but a general paranoia of looking like a monopoly dominated the culture, and this might have influenced what happened. In Not All Fairy Tales Have Happy Endings by Sierra founder Ken Williams, which we made a two-part series about, it is explained that the IBM software contracts Sierra received in the 80s had a pretty generous non-exclusive clause that made it pretty clear vendors could sell their software to IBM's competitors. Let's call it a "we're not a monopoly, we promise" clause. Now, I have found no direct source ever to claim that the Microsoft contract was similar, but it's very possible that this was also present on the contract Bill Gates signed, which gave them full power to sell MS-DOS to any competitors if the chance ever presented itself. August 12, 1981, New York City. Almost a year to the day from Lois' fateful promise. The day everyone had been waiting for. Hundreds of IBM employees had worked incredibly hard around the clock to have the product ready for a public reveal. Problems of all shapes and sizes had mirrored the project at every corner. It was just a few days ago that a task force had flown on a private jet to every warehouse to add insulating paper around the power supply of every unit to avoid a last-second electrical problem that could shock users. But it was all worth it. Given the crazy amount of suppliers involved in this project, most of the details had leaked to the press already, many of which were not super fascinated about this weird IBM experiment, but the team knew better. This was their time to shine. A fully usable computer with one disk drive, 16 kilobytes of RAM, and a $1,595 price tag. Home computers were no longer a toy for nerds and tinkerers. With the IBM logo on the front, the PC was now ready for business. Quite literally. Microsoft had worked up to the last second to have MS-DOS and their release software ready for launch, but they knew this was a huge opportunity that they needed to seize. With a release slate of software that included Microsoft Basic, BC Calc for spreadsheets, Easy Writer for word processing, and even a text game called Microsoft Adventure, based on the original Colossal Cave Adventure, the marketplace was ready. Apple reacted to this news with a slightly mocking ad, and a technological rivalry between the Microsoft Power IBM PC and Apple computers began. And as long as IBM controlled the proprietary BIOS of the PC, they alone could control their side of the battle and capitalize on this new format. Whoever controlled the BIOS will control the PC. But something was about to happen to that BIOS that will make the IBM team doubt all of their decisions, but that is the story that we will explore soon. In fact, you can explore that story immediately. The next episode is going to be about how one company figured out a way to legally remove IBM from the IBM PC, and all it starts is with one innovative product. And that episode is already out right now in our streaming service, Nebula.
I think it's quite obvious that as I try to increase the quality of what I do here, this story was a little bit more than I could chew. And it's only because of the support of all of you who have already signed up to Nebula that I managed to pull through. As a reward for that, I have been working very hard to turn this into what we call a Nebula first show.
That means that anytime a video hits YouTube, a cut of the next one is up in Nebula, so you could be watching part 2 right now. There's also a new exclusive episode of SideQuest about the fight to market this computer in ways IBM did not like. And that is not just me. Wendover Productions has a Nebula original series on logistics, Extra History is also always one episode ahead, Neo has his fantastic Underexposure series that is Nebula exclusive, not to mention the truly killer lineup of originals and Nebula first shows that we have been announcing on the past few months. Through my link, you can get a terrific 40% discount on annual subscriptions, which comes down to like $2.5 a month. But if you really want to tell the world that the future of high quality video content should belong to creators and not to venture capitalists, we're making a limited run of lifetime memberships. Nebula for life for a one-time payment of $300. Early on, we took the decision that rather than take an investment and give control to some VC, we would rather build this with you, the viewer who decides to support an indie streaming service. Lifetime memberships sold in the past are already helping fund some of the great originals coming down the line, and of course, the benefit to the viewers having access to Nebula forever, not having to worry about the price increases or recurring monthly fees that come to define the streaming service industry. So if you want to support not just the channel but every creator in the platform in ways that matter, Lifetime is the way. Heck, during the holidays we have gift cards available, so this can also be a hell of a present for the Nebula fan in your life. Everybody wins.